I'm going to live with my family. You all need to get out.
As my in-laws were giving instructions to the movers, Mark pointed at us and made this bold declaration. His face was twisted with malice, and I couldn't help but show my disgust. But May, standing next to me, seemed different and nervously asked Mark,
"Dad, don't you know?"
Mark looked puzzled at her words. May's frantic demeanor caused not only Mark, but also his parents, Nancy and Roger, to stop what they were doing and look our way. Only Julie, his sister, seemed uninterested and kept giving orders to the movers. Though I was quite done with this family, I decided to tell them the truth. My name is Angela Sawyer, a 46-year-old working from home. I have a husband and daughter, and we lead a fairly comfortable life. I met Mark back when I was still working at my old company, and we first hit it off at a company mixer. We exchanged numbers and started dating afterward. After several dates, Mark proposed to me 3 years into our relationship. My mother was quite ill at the time, and I wanted to marry quickly to give her peace of mind, so I accepted Mark's proposal. Not long after our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. Mark was overjoyed, excitedly talking about seeing our baby's face soon. When our daughter, May, was born, Mark took the lead in parenting, and I was happy every day. But even then, I had a few concerns. My main worry was my mother. Though she was quite sick and was close to being bedridden, she was delighted to see her grandchild and would come visit her often. In the beginning, she would visit frequently, but by the time May entered middle school, her condition visibly deteriorated. After I'd been married for a while, I quit my previous job and switched to working from home so I could care for my mother whenever needed. This worked out well because by the time May graduated middle school, my mother was in and out of the hospital, and I was able to take care of her as much as I wanted. When I visited with May, she was always overjoyed. I hoped that building these positive moments would help her recover enough to go out as she used to. But around that time, Mark's behavior gradually became odd. He used to let me visit my mother without issue, but lately he'd been increasingly upset, complaining that I wasn't taking care of him.
Going to see your mom again. You're so devoted to her while you don't give me any care at all even though I'm tired from work. Man, I wish I could be sick too.
He would say these nonsensical things and stubbornly refuse any attempt by me or May to appease him. Worried about both my mother and Mark, I felt lost until May offered to take care of Mark.
"Mom, I'll look after Dad. You should go see Grandma."
I'd always lean on her reassuring words and smile. Then one day, Julie, Mark's sister, reached out to me.
"I heard you've been neglecting my brother."
She started off with this out-of-the-blue accusation, making me double-check my phone screen in disbelief. I thought she had me confused with someone else, but the name on the screen was clearly Julie. Confused by this baseless accusation, I could only deny it. "It's been a while, Julie. What's this about? I'm not neglecting Mark." Before I could understand why she was saying this, Julie pressed on.
"Don't play dumb. I heard it straight from my brother. Lately, you've been so focused on your own mother that you're neglecting the household, and yet you still have the nerve to call yourself his wife.
True, I'd been glued to my sick mother lately, but I never imagined Mark would tell Julie. But I wasn't neglecting the house. May would help with chores after school, and I was handling my job and my mother's care while still doing housework. Although Mark had been complaining more lately, like wanting to dine at an upscale restaurant or not liking the laundry detergent scent, these were things beyond our control and hard to address. It's not like we were neglecting our responsibilities. Before I could explain everything to Julie, she dropped a bombshell.
Well, it's too late now. Mom and Dad have heard about it too, and they might come over to give you a piece of their minds.
Leaving me with these harsh words, she hung up quickly. Stunned by this unexpected turn of events, I was left speechless until May's voice brought me back to my senses.
Mom, I'm home. What's up? You look like you're in shock.
After being snapped back to reality, I told May, who had just returned from school, about what had happened. Hearing this, May was as stunned as I was, shaking her head in disbelief before letting out a sigh.
Hey, Mom, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Can you hear me out?
May asked with a serious face, and I nodded nervously. After hearing what she had to say, I felt quite pathetic. Mark's ridiculous complaints and Julie's harassing calls continued. And finally, his parents, Nancy and Roger, had decided to take action. One day, after visiting my mother, I came home to find Nancy cooking in the kitchen. When I entered the living room, I stood there with my mouth open, frozen, still holding my bags as I watched her. Noticing me, Nancy furrowed her brow and approached me.
Go, you're back. How's your mom? Well, whatever. Sit down.
I could only follow her orders as she brushed past me with a scowl, unable to grasp the situation. Sitting on my own couch in my living room, I endured a long lecture from Nancy. She began by criticizing my attitude toward Mark, then berated me for neglecting my housework and letting my husband do chores. However, as I listened, I noticed a few discrepancies, and I tried to explain myself. Nancy, I need to correct a few things. I've never asked Mark to help with chores. In fact, he doesn't help at all, and I'm embarrassed to admit that it's May who helps with what I can't handle. Suddenly, Nancy stood up and pointed her finger at me, shouting,
You think you can fool me with those lies? Are you telling me my son lied to me? How shameless. I'm done here.
With her face flushed with anger, Nancy stormed out of the house, leaving the stove burning. I quickly rushed to turn off the stove, so I couldn't follow her out. That night, Mark was in an oddly good mood, almost unsettlingly so. He started talking about his mother as soon as he got home, and would cut me off any time I tried to speak. May seemed puzzled too, so we decided to stay quiet and let things unfold to avoid upsetting Mark. For the next few days, Mark stayed in a good mood. Thanks to that, I could take care of my mother without any worries. But despite my care, my mother quietly passed away. May and I mourned but managed to get through the funeral, and then we spent some time at her house to sort things out. I really wanted Mark to help, but the moment I suggested it, He became irritable for the first time in a while. Reluctantly, I began sorting things out with May, but the house was naturally filled with countless memories of my mother, and each one brought back memories of her, making it difficult to get much done. I called Mark and decided to stay at my mother's house for the night. He seemed in a very good mood.
Take your time and relax since you have the chance.
But with May's school and my work, that wasn't an option. So I let him know we'd be back the next day. After managing to get things somewhat organized, we decided to head back home the following day. As we got closer, we noticed a large truck parked in front of the house. Curious, we realized it was from a moving company, and Mark and Nancy were directing the unloading. "Hey, what's going on?" May and I rushed over to stop them, but Mark stepped forward, puffing out his chest.
What? You're back already? Well, it's too late now.
With a smug look, Mark crossed his arms and continued as he watched the movers carry things into the house.
I'm living here with my family. You two need to get out.
As Nancy and Roger gave orders to the movers, Mark pointed at us and made this bold declaration. His face twisted maliciously, and I couldn't help but show my disgust. But May, standing next to me, nervously asked Mark.
Dad, don't you know?
Mark looked puzzled at her words. May's frantic demeanor caused not only Mark, but also Nancy and Roger to stop what they were doing and look our way. Only Julie seemed uninterested and kept giving orders to the movers. Though I was quite done with this family, I decided to tell them the truth. "Did you forget? This house is mine." His parents looked stunned, and Mark turned pale and began to panic. Hearing my words, Julie finally stopped giving instructions to the movers and stepped forward angrily.
What are you talking about? There's no way you could afford to build an impressive house like this.
Julie approached with an intimidating demeanor, but this time it was my turn to proudly puff out my chest. "Thank you for the compliment. My dad built this house because it's my family home."
That can't be. This house is way too nice, practically new.
"I'm glad you think so, Nancy. My mom had it remodeled for us when Mark and I got married. He should know that too. I'm not sure how he forgot, but this house is, of course, in my name, and my mom paid for the renovations. To ensure we could live here long term, my mom had willingly moved to an apartment. Mark and I had both thanked her and even discussed living together with her. Mark must have realized his plan had fallen apart, as he finally grasped the reality of the situation.
And one more thing.
May then chimed in, sharing information we found during the estate clearing.
Grandma left a lot of inheritance to Mom and me, but unfortunately, it's not money. It's property, like land and condos, stuff that can't be quickly converted to cash.
Mark's eyes lit up instantly, and he turned to his parents, while Julie pumped her fist. I wondered how they could be so happy after hearing May's words, but Mark quickly spun back to me, yelling angrily.
Hey, wait a second. I never heard about your mom having all this money. You never mentioned it when we got married.
His family quickly joined in with their self-serving complaints.
What the heck? That's marriage fraud.
How sneaky. You must have kept quiet just so Mark wouldn't get any inheritance.
Greedy woman. From the way she was talking earlier, it's like they have all the inheritance.
Roger, who realized a critical point, looked at us for clarification. I nodded firmly and explained the situation. Yes, the inheritance is only for May and me. Mark gets nothing. I found the will yesterday while going through the estate. Upon hearing this, his family turned beat-red with rage, especially Nancy, who was the angriest of all.
That can't be allowed. We're getting Mark a divorce, and we'll squeeze every penny out of you in alimony.
She stomped her foot and shouted, but I calmly accepted her words. Sounds good. I agree. The moment the word agree left my mouth, Nancy spun around and ran off. She was probably headed to the courthouse to get the divorce papers, as it was nearby. I let her storm off, not stopping her, and watched as she disappeared in the distance. Mark, who had been watching with a bitter expression, then asked,
So, what now?
"What do you mean? Are you talking about the divorce, or where you're going to live?"
Both?
He snapped back, almost ready to bite, but I looked up at the house as if uninterested. What if I told you this house was already listed for sale?
Huh?
This time, Mark was the one left stunned. He looked back at Roger before looking at me again. He couldn't understand what I meant. He can't be blamed, really. He wouldn't have expected me to put the house up for sale while I'd spent one extra night at my mom's place. Facing Mark's confused family, I puffed out my chest again. I've been thinking about it for a while. Every time I saw your horrible behavior, I wondered why I was married to you, but I stayed for May's sake. Even she's tired of you now. His face turned pale as he looked at May, shocked at this new reality. She met his gaze and said what was on her mind.
Dad, you always used to tell me how it's so unfair that you're ignored even though you're the head of the house, or that you're neglected despite being tired from work. But don't you think the way you're treated might be your own fault? How come you never think that you're the one ignoring and neglecting us?
Mark was left speechless by May's sharp words. I hoped that in his crushed state, he'd quietly sign the divorce papers, and then I'd have nothing more to say. Just when I thought that, Julie blurted out something outrageous.
Oh, if I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have bothered with the renovation.
Stunned by her sudden confession, we all turned to her simultaneously. Not only did her statement surprise her father and Mark, but even I was taken aback by what she'd said.
What on earth did you do?
Roger shouted and pressed her for answers, but she casually began explaining as if it wasn't a big deal.
Well, I also want to live in my dream home, so I thought I'd just renovate the house while we were planning to take over. But if you're going to sell it, isn't it worth more with a renovation?
Julie lit up as if she'd come up with a brilliant idea, and both May and I sighed. I wasn't the only one who was shocked. Mark and Roger felt the same way. Mark was clenching his fists, trying to contain his anger. Unable to tolerate Julie's recklessness, he began shouting.
Listen, sis, whether it's being sold or we keep it, you should have told us. We were already planning to move in. Where are we supposed to live during the renovation?
Though his phrasing was a little off, His point was valid. Julie seemed to realize this.
Oh, you're right.
As Mark tried to yell at her again, we noticed someone running toward us in the distance. It was Nancy, returning with the divorce papers.
I got them. Here are the divorce papers. Now, sign them right away.
Despite her age, Nancy was out of breath, but gleefully waved the divorce papers in my face, unaware of the family squabble that had erupted in her absence. But that didn't matter to me, so I snatched the papers from her and shoved them toward Mark. You should start writing. You've been mocking me all this time, and you wanted this divorce in the first place, didn't you?
What? No way.
Knowing about my mother's inheritance, Mark immediately refused. But given his behavior and his family's nonsensical actions, there was no way I could continue to tolerate this. I needed him to sign the divorce papers here and now, so I focused on provoking him enough to make him snap. You changed your tune real quick. Makes sense. Your recent good mood was because you wanted to take over my house. But too bad. Even without my mother's inheritance, I would never let you have this house, and it's already up for sale. You can't back out now, but either way, you'll be left out in the cold. Mark made a sour face as he stared at the divorce papers. He seemed to be restraining himself from angrily filling them out, but I knew what set him off. It must be humiliating, but if you agree to sign these divorce papers, I might calm down a little. Mark always thought of me as beneath him, so I knew that if I set the terms from a position of authority, he'd easily do exactly what I wanted. That was my thinking behind the statement, but it also contained a lot of genuine feelings. Just as I thought, Mark's face flushed red with anger as he snatched the divorce papers from my hand and began filling them out right there.
If that's what you want, then fine. I'll divorce you.
His impulsive decision left me feeling relieved. I worried he'd circle back to reason and change his mind, but he was still just as simple-minded as I'd known him to be. After receiving the half-filled divorce papers, I quickly filled in my own section before something unexpected could happen. Once completed, I handed the papers to May and turned to face the family. Well, all that's left is to submit these to the courthouse, so take back all the stuff you moved into this house.
Wait a second, you said signing the divorce papers would calm you down.
That's true, but I never agreed to the move.
What about the renovation?
What renovation?
Nancy seemed clueless about the renovation since it was arranged while she was away. When Roger explained it to her, she lunged at Julie. As the ensuing brawl broke out, Mark and Roger focused entirely on Julie, so I decided to quietly slip away with May. But before we could escape, Mark and Julie tried to grab us, only for the movers to step in and stop them. With the chaos escalating, we could hear the distant sound of police sirens. Protected by the movers, I glanced around and noticed that many of our neighbors had come out to see what was going on amidst the commotion. One of them must have called the police because we saw a patrol car approaching with flashing red and blue lights, and I felt a sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived, as Mark's entire family decided to lunge at May and me again. The police intervened just in time, so we weren't hurt. Even after being restrained, Mark's family kept causing a ruckus, so the officer called for backup and put us in the patrol car to calm things down. Julie misunderstood the situation, thinking we were being arrested, and tried to throw their belongings back into the house. Naturally, the police stopped her, and with the help of the backup officers who had just arrived, they finally managed to bring the chaos under control. As Mark's family started to regain their composure, the police asked them to come along for questioning, but they immediately started another commotion. Mark, Julie, or perhaps both, must have laid their hands on the police, as they were arrested on the spot for obstructing official duties and taken away in the backup patrol car. After being admonished by the officers, Nancy and Roger were also taken to the station for questioning. We watched the whole thing unfold and gave a brief statement from the patrol car. A while later, Mark and I were officially divorced. Even though he had already filled out the divorce papers, Mark threw a tantrum, saying he didn't want a divorce, which dragged out the process, but with a lawyer's help, we managed to finalize the divorce safely. Soon, we found a buyer for the house and received the money from the sale. Julie had pushed hard for renovations, but the remodeling had already been done when my mom passed the house on to me, so the buyer quickly appeared. Since then, my in-laws weren't prosecuted, but they couldn't return to the house I inherited, and they had planned to move into that house, so they sold their own home and now find themselves without a place to live. Their reputations took a hit, and they were shunned by their neighbors, leading to a significantly more uncomfortable lifestyle. I think it's inevitable, given how big the incident was. My alimony claim further cornered Mark's family. Word of Mark's involvement in the chaos spread at his workplace, and he resigned after a pay cut. And now he does some part-time jobs while paying alimony and child support for May. His income and expenses are completely imbalanced, so he juggles multiple jobs to make ends meet. Julie initially acted unfazed and continued her work as a beauty consultant, but rumors about the incident eventually reached her clients and then her supervisors, leading to her termination. She had been living quite extravagantly and quickly ran out of money. Additionally, she has to make alimony payments to me, so like Mark, she is juggling several jobs to manage her finances. It seems that after some sort of dispute, Nancy and Roger divorced and now live separately. Neighbors made rumors go around which led to Nancy losing her part-time job, while Roger, who planned to enjoy his retirement with his severance package, had to use most of it to pay me alimony. And now, at his age, he's searching for a job. Each of them faces their own challenges, but that's their way of making amends to May and me, and I hope they'll reflect on their actions thoroughly. Meanwhile, May and I moved into a new home, so even if Mark's family were to attack her school, she's already transferred, so it's not an issue. I can continue working from home while living leisurely with May, and I can't help but smile at the thought. Embracing the joy of newfound freedom, I plan to live happily with May from now on.